So have you seen those bumper stickers that you see them in various cities? Usually they're like smaller, medium-sized cities. And they exclaim something like, "Keep Austin weird," or "Keep Portland weird." I think there was even a Knoxville one that was like that, though I think it may now have been replaced by something like "Keep Knoxville scruffy" or something. But anyway, I can't but read our gospel passage today without wanting to urge us to embrace the story as a way of keeping religion weird. Let me tell you what I mean. The other day I was talking with a good friend of mine, and he said that he had been reflecting on the resurrection, especially passages like the one from our gospel today. Passages in which Jesus appears among the disciples, appears and talks with them, and even eats with the disciples. He says he is there in flesh and bone. He eats a piece of grilled fish. And my friend said to me that in his grief counseling, he has been talking about the resurrection of the body. I imagine that my friend has been doing a lot of grief counseling these days. And he said he was talking about sightings, like when a person sights Elvis, walking about, or somebody like Jim Morrison, or some other such figure. But not just famous people. What if others could be seen by the right vision? People often speak of seeing their loved one, just a glimpse in their old chair, or disappearing around the corner, or in the street in the middle of a crowd. Just a glimpse of this living presence of one who has died. What if, my friend asked, what if this was real? What if it wasn't just a mind trick, an illusion of grief, but something more? What if the dead lived among us? And then my friend, he laughed, and he said, "I know, I've probably gone off the deep end. There's this place in Acts that talks about those who had seen Jesus raised from the dead. It's called God's chosen. Now, that's not meant to give those folks a big head like they were chosen because they were special. Rather, it's meant to emphasize that this vision of Jesus come back from the dead is one that is given for those who are prepared by God to see it." Now, before you think that I want you simply to believe in supernatural phenomena, that's not exactly what I mean by keeping religion weird. There's something else, something more, and I think something better. My friend is a great counselor, and what he was trying to get at, I think, was that the resurrection from the dead is not just something tacked on to the end of the story about a great ethical teacher. No, it tells us something about life and death, about grief and consolation, and about despair and hope. In the East, hidden sometimes in churches known only to locals, but also elsewhere in monasteries, even on archways in great cities, there is an icon. An icon, remember, is a religious picture. A lot of times it's a picture of saints, sometimes of scenes from the Bible or Jesus' life. One of those icons is called the anastasis, or just anastasis. And that means resurrection. Now, the picture is familiar to some of you, I think, and there are variations on it. But I'll give you a kind of universal description whose details may vary. In it, Jesus, dressed in white, is in the center of your view. Beneath his feet are gates of metal that are torn from their hinges, and he is standing on them. And they are arranged like a cross. And those doors span a dark abyss torn into the earth. Beneath them is a gray figure, bearded, being crushed. Chains and keys are scattered about. That figure is Hades, guardian and warden of the realm of the dead. Jesus stretches both arms to either side, He's actually in a striding or climbing form. And on either side of him are figures, sometimes more, sometimes less. On one side is Eve, and behind her sometimes are New Testament figures like Peter and Paul. On the other side is Adam, and behind him is his murdered son Abel, murdered by his brother Cain, and Solomon and David. And Jesus grasps Eve and Adam and is lifting them from the realm of the dead. Jesus is being raised up, but in his rising, he is lifting Adam and Eve. And they represent all of humankind. This is not just a resurrection of one interesting and complex figure, Jesus. It is the raising of us all. Easter is not just about Jesus. It's about us. If we die with Christ, says Paul, then also we are raised with him. You see, keeping religion weird is not just about supernatural phenomena. It's about the defeat of death itself. The arc of our history, human history, is not one that gives us a great deal of hope sometimes. You might remember that this week is Earth Day, April 22nd. On the one hand, it's a great celebration of the wonders of the earth, of the chorus of birds I heard singing in the pre-dawn hours this morning, of the azalea blooms I can see in my front yard, of the dogwoods around town and the misty mountains rising up on our horizon. But most of us also know of the warnings we hear about rising sea levels, the death of species, the destruction of habitat. But it's not just in nature. We witness in our world and in our city violence and death by gunfire in schools and workplaces. Homeless, mentally ill, wandering without treatment and ending up in jails. Housing prices skyrocketing out of the reach of anyone with a normal job. It's not just the problems, though. It's the frustrations about solutions. What is our trajectory? Where are we headed? Sometimes we think we can plan and see our way out of this, but I'm not so optimistic that we can. Things look bleak. We feel powerless. Let's face it. But that's not the end of the story. This is where the weirdness of religion steps in. For Jesus walks among his disciples and he eats with them a piece of grilled fish. In John's gospel, he's on the shore. I heard also from a source that they served a little sangria with that fish. In fact, in the Aramaic translation of this passage, they offer him the sweetness of a honeycomb with the fish. And they can't believe it. Why? Because they're so full of joy, says Luke. It's the greatest thing since a grand slam lifts you over the number 2 ranked team in college baseball. If you don't get that reference, just Google it and you'll see. Jesus, you see, is not a concept. Jesus is not a concept. He's not a proposition. Jesus is the living presence of God among us. This living presence is so powerful, even death is trampled under feet. The trajectory of human misery and our tendency to violence is reversed. God does not want the world to crumble into hierarchies of exploitation. And God has chosen us to be a living presence among the living dead. You see, the resurrection in all its weirdness is not just a wishful escape from the reality of death. It's a radical hope that even though things look entrenched, even though despair seems never ending, even though problems seem intractable or more than intractable, they are reversible, defeatable, transformable. The resurrection, you see, is the message that yes, we are being emptied, but only so we can be filled by God. Our descent into the difficulties and darknesses of life are preparation for our change, our transformation, our divinization. For life is not a series of concepts either. It's not a series of propositions or beliefs held. It's not opinions that must be held onto without compromise, nor is it prejudices. Life is about encounter. It's about meeting each other. It's about meeting one back from the dead on the road, where not our hearts burning within us. Keeping religion weird is not necessarily seeing Elvis. Rather, it's refusing to isolate ourselves, refusing to turn inward, refusing to burn in anger and defeat. Rather, keeping religion weird is laughter and overwhelming joy that our wrists are clasped too, as we rise, freed from the oppressions and violence of the world. Not just us, but the poorest and least among us. I'll end with one last image. In a Psalter, a book of Psalms, there is this Anastasis image in the margin. And down the page, from the top, there is first Jesus, and he grasps Adam. And Adam grasps Eve. And Eve grasps her son Abel. And Abel reaches back toward an empty sarcophagus, as if to say, let the chain of rising continue. Amen.
Amen.